Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am back. Hello ladies and gentlemen of the interweb, this is the episode 55, and after being MIA for several months now, I'm back to go about and review one of my most anticipated films of 2013. It's Thor: The Dark World. Now ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to hide the fact that I loved Thor, the first one. There's some people that didn't really like it, but then there were some people that really liked it, like myself. I thought it was an interesting take on the sort of comic book origins that we know from the source material. They found a way to take this fantasy elements but incorporate some sci-fi and some realism into it that made it fit into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's one of my personal favorite Phase 1 films. So now as we move into Phase 2, we have a lot more danger, a lot more character development, a lot more stuff going on in this one that promises a lot, especially with Alan Taylor being on the project as well. But does it succeed? Well, check out this review and find out. So as I normally do in these reviews, I'm going to give you the good and the bad. But firstly, let's start with the story. So in terms of the plot, the film takes place 2 years after the Avengers, with Loki being in prison for what he did. The Bifrost Bridge has finally been, repaired, and Thor is on his way with his merry band of people trying to restore peace to the Nine Realms. And for a while, everything's all nice and happy, but as per usual in these kind of films, evil lurks in the darkness. A new powerful energy known as the Ether, which has the power to go about and plunge the universe into darkness, is being hunted by the Dark Elves, led by Malekith the Accursed. And in this film, Thor has to go about and use all of his power to take out the dark energy and stop Malekith from plunging the world into darkness, basically. And that is the plot synopsis of the film without going into the area of spoilers. So let's start with the good. Firstly, I want to talk about the story. The story in this film is so good, much better than the first film. In this film, everything feels like there is a greater sense of danger, a greater sense of scope, a greater sense of urgency. And because of the history with the Asgardians and the introduction of the Dark Elves, it feels like the whole mythology of, this world that's been created in Thor's films have been fleshed out a hell of a lot more. In Kenneth Branagh's film, we got a taste of what it is, but in this film it was fleshed out to the maximum, especially with the introduction of the other 9 realms that were put into play. Everything just feels a lot bigger, a lot wider, and it feels like everything's interconnected now. And you get a greater sense of what's going on in Thor's world outside of just the small things that's going on in Earth. And even when you've got all this chaos going on in Asgard and Earth and all these other 9 realms, there's still moments for there's intimate parts between characters. Family is one of the big themes in this film, and there are some great moments between Thor and his family, his friends, and between him and Jane as well. I appreciate that very much. About the cast as well, the cast are pretty much flawless in this film. They are all bloody brilliant. Let's start with Chris Hemsworth of Thor. I thought he was brilliant in the first film. He inhabited all of Thor's mannerisms in terms of his powerful charisma, his on-screen presence, and his sort of love for Bao, and I thought he was great in the first film. He excelled in the Avengers, and in this film, he just steps it up right to the top, man. He is just so good. In this film, he offers more of the same, but in a more emotional sense. You can see that this guy has seen things, and he is trying to get on with his life after the whole events of New York, but then also have to restore the 9 realms, also have to grow up and then become king of Asgard, and he's also got his stuff going on with Jane. He's a much more complicated character than he was before, and Chris Hemsworth just kills it as Thor. He's so good. But then the other scene still has to be Tom Hiddleston as Loki. He is just the most Batman geezer ever. And by this point, obviously, a lot of people are just oh yeah, we're tired of Loki. We don't need him in these films anymore. Can't we just get someone else? And granted, I can see where people are going with that, but you can't deny Tom Hiddleston's skills. He added a more sympathetic, more interesting character than what most of us are used to in the comics in the first film. In the second film, he became much more of a villainous, dastardly kind of guy, but still had a lot of likability to him. And in this film, he just kills it. He just goes that one step further and just becomes Batman. It's so good. He's such a complicated, dastardly guy, but he's so good. Hiddleston kills it, man. Such a Batman. And then there's Natalie Portman as Jane Foster. I thought she was a lot better in this film. In the first film, she was good, but I don't feel she was as interesting as, say, Pepper Potts or Peggy Carter. And in this film, she just seems a little bit more useful. She's a lot more involved in the plot, and that was something I really liked about her character. She's still that sort of fun, happy-go-lucky, silly kind of character that we know from the first film, but she seems a little bit more smart, a little bit more involved in the plot, and that was good. Anthony Hopkins as Odin really kills it. He has that great Anthony Hopkins sort of screen presence that you've come to expect in a lot of his films. And in this film, I think that he was a little bit more active again, and I thought that that was just one of his more interesting elements, especially when he was having his conversation with Thor. That was good. And then there's Christopher Eccleston as Malekith the Accursed. I thought he was really cool. He seems to come across as like, was it a very straightforward villain. He wants to plunge the world into darkness. He wants to rule and mean. Yeah, like what more could you ever want than that? And while some people may just say, oh yeah, he's a boring villain, I thought he did well. He had a goal, he went for it, and he was pretty hardcore. So yeah, I can't ask any more from people than that, really. And other than the people I've mentioned, the rest of the cast do pretty well. Kat Dennings is pretty cool as Darcy again. She happens to have like, that comic relief stuff that we remember from the first film, but she is used a little better in this film, and her humour is, I think, a lot better, in my opinion. And then there's the presentation, which is just so good. Visually, the film is incredible. The CGI, which was in the first film, I thought that was good, but this one is just a hell of a lot better. The amount of detail, crisp, sharp, beautiful stuff that's going on in Asgard, in several of the different realms, and all of the detail that comes with the fight scenes and stuff like that is so good. The art direction is wonderful. The use of color is very interesting and really helps evoke some of these scenes. And just seeing Asgard in the way in which that is now, with all the CGI but all the more practical props and realistic locations that they use for some of these areas in the film, was just bad, man. You get to see a lively Asgard with people and other locations and more interior and exterior locations than ever before in the last film. It's bad, man. And there are certain moments where you're just getting flashback from other sort of fantasy and sci-fi other related films because of all the crazy action that's going on in this film, because it's so good. And then there's the soundtrack by Brian Tyler, which is pretty damn good. It has a lot of interesting, emotional, deep and involving scenes, and this guy is starting to become one of my favorite film composers because he happens to be very versatile. And while I think his soundtrack lacks a bit of the majestic sounds of Patrick Doyle's soundtrack in the first Thor film, this guy is more than capable of creating a very interesting and heartfelt soundtrack. And now let's talk about the bad points in the film. There are very few, but I'd say the only problems I had with the film was that some of the characters just weren't fully utilized. The Warriors 3, as much as I loved them, were just not in the film as much as I thought they would be. Neither was Sif, and Eric Selvig wasn't really utilized as much as I'd hoped. But considering the amount of characters that were added to this film, it's not surprising that there were some people that were going to be pushed to the sidelines, really. And other than that, I'd say the rest of the film was minty fresh. I had no problems. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, Thor: The Dark World is a much bigger improvement over the first film. I love the first film, but this one just takes the cake. There happens to be a much deeper emphasis on story, characters, and the action in the film is great. Alan Taylor should be commended for going about and taking what was established by Kenneth Branagh and bringing much more realism, darkness, and a little bit more grittiness to it. And I just love the film so much. It was so good, and there are so many twists and turns in this film that doesn't make it feel like a conventional superhero film, but more like a sci-fi fantasy film with action elements in there and superhero elements just combined. Chris Hemsworth and Tom Hiddleston should be commended for their roles because they just steal the show as Thor and Loki, and I would highly recommend this film. Oh yeah, and stick around for the credits, ladies and gentlemen. There is some cool shit in there too. So now it's down to you guys. Tell me what you thought of the film. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. And be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and join the revolution that is the Hypersonic 55. So, until the next time, this is the Hypersonic 55 signing out, and happy Halloween.